I am the very proud great-grandfather of triplets. They also have a younger brother. The boy triplet is named Jackson. And several years ago, when he was in kindergarten, he received an empathy citation from his school. And this citation was posted on the refrigerator door for weeks on end. And when I was in their home, I observed this over and over and over again. And finally, I asked Jackson if he could say the word empathy. And he struggled a little bit, but got it out finally. And then I asked him if he knew what it meant. And with a great deal of self-assurance, he said, "It means I did something nice for someone who was hurting." Jackson is almost 12 now. He lit our chalice this morning. He's sitting right back there. And recently, while he was online with a game group that he had organized, I don't really understand all of that, but anyway, it's what happens these days. He observed a boy being bullied in another group. And so he invited the boy to join his group. At which point the bully, now all alone, apologized, said he was sorry, and begged Jackson to allow him to join his group also. "Of course," said Jackson, "you may, but only if you agree to play nice. No nastiness." On April 11th of this year, a syndicated article written by in the Chicago Tribune was published in the Frederick News Post. I'll put in a plug here for the Frederick News Post. If you don't subscribe to it, you should. Support your local newspaper. At any rate, this article was written by one Kevin Waldman. He's a psychological researcher at Northwestern and the University of Michigan. And the title of his piece was "Radical Empathy and Its Dangerous Consequences for America's Future." In his words, he is studying the intersection of empathy, ideological extremism, and social influence. His traffic metaphor, intersection, is an interesting one, as I will show in a moment. Waldman's immediate concern is of students protesting the crisis in Gaza at the aforementioned universities. The atrocities of October 7th committed by Hamas, and his claim of their unswerving support of the Palestinian cause. He does not say Hamas, he says Palestinian. And he asserts it's all about empathy gone amok. resulting in what he calls extremism. His claim that empathy cannot be an unqualified good because it demands an unconditional allegiance to perceived victims at the expense of truth and moral clarity. Let me repeat that. Empathy cannot be an unqualified good because it demands an unconditional allegiance to perceived victims at the expense of truth and moral clarity. I think his claim is nonsense. I have read and reread this thesis of his 100 times, trying to get my head around how he has concluded in his research that empathy is unjustified. To be sure, there are students, very few, who embrace what Hamas did on October 7th. That is sad because the world community condemns that hateful terrorism, as do I. But the aftermath of that atrocity is equally terrible. And that is what most students are protesting. Now to Waldman's great intersection of empathy, ideological extremism, and social influence. The metaphor is his, not mine. And some intersection it is. And you know what's in that intersection. The traffic signal, if it was ever there, is long gone. The middle is covered with the corpses of the dead, the debris of homes and businesses, not to mention the violent history of the distant past, going back even 2,000 years, and the not-so-distant past, like yesterday, and throw in such things as the Holocaust or Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe or dispersion, and now the deaths of Jews at the hands of Hamas, and the deaths of over 60,000 and more Palestinians in Gaza, the majority of whom are women and children. This swamp of cruelty is so infected that the call to be human cannot be heard above the disturbing noise of bullets and bombs. And what dominates Waldman's intersection and what he leaves out entirely is not only violence, but escalatory violence. His formula is nonsense. It is ironic, I think, that this article appeared during the Jewish week of Passover. Passover's essential message, its core message, according to British Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, is empathy. You shall not oppress the stranger. You know the heart of the stranger. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. The rabbi continues. It is as if God had said, your sufferings have taught you something of immense importance. As Jews, we are told you have been oppressed. Therefore, come to the rescue of the oppressed, wherever they are. You have suffered. Therefore, you shall become the people who are there to offer help when others are suffering. At the core of Torah is not only empathy, but radical empathy. Jennifer Rubin and other Jewish conservative journalists have called out Netanyahu for his flagrant use of IDF with U.S. complicity to terrorize Palestinians. Others claim that to criticize Netanyahu is being anti-Semitic. It is essentially what Waldman is claiming in his research. The fact is that Netanyahu has been condemned by the International Criminal Court in The Hague as a war criminal for crimes against humanity. It is a court that the United States is not a member of, for reasons that I'd like to go into at a later time. We do not support that court. Shame on us. It is much in the news as I speak right now. Netanyahu is a thug, and he belongs in jail. He has violated the fundamental precepts of his faith, and it is not inappropriate to call him, as Jon Stewart has suggested, a bad Jew. Just as it is not inappropriate to call Christians who espouse violence as the only response to conflict bad Christians. And it is a very, very cheap trope, I think, to say that the support of him and his crimes is anti-Semitic. He has done more to support groups like Hamas for generations to come than anybody else. Hatred begets hatred, and violence begets violence. And history teaches us categorically and absolutely that little Palestinian boys in Gaza will grow up to hate Jews. It is inevitable for generations to come. Not all will hate, I hope, but the violence will only continue and continue and continue. It is tragic. Or take the example of right-wing Christian evangelicals whose clamorous support of Trump in the wake of the bombing of missile sites in Iran brought them to a cheering ovation. Diana Butler Bass, who is theologian and journalist and religious writer, has reproduced a letter to Trump from Mike Huckabee, our ambassador to Israel. And Mike Huckabee, if you don't know, is a white evangelical supremacist. Mr. President, he says, God spared you in Butler, Pennsylvania, to be his most consequential president in a century, maybe ever. The decisions on your shoulder I would not want to be made by anyone else. I am your appointed servant in this land, and I'm available to you, but I do not try to get in your presence very often because I trust your instincts. No president in my lifetime has been in a position like yours, not since Truman in 1945. I don't reach out to persuade you, only to encourage you. I believe you will hear from heaven And that voice is far more important than mine or anyone else's. You sent me to Israel to be your eyes and ears and a voice to make sure our flag flies above our embassy. My job is to be the last one to leave. I will not abandon this post. Our flag will not come down. You did not seek this moment sought you. It is my honor to serve you. Mike Huckabee. Bass points out, and quite rightly so, that we read something like this and we see Hitler and fascism and we think of human suffering. But you need to know this. People like Huckabee think final judgment. They see violence as part of Jesus coming again, not in peace, but with a sword. Bombing Iran is God's unfolding history. And Huckabee in Jerusalem is anti-Semitism par excellence. But more than that, the violence he celebrates is escalatory violence. So what do I mean by escalatory violence? Rob gave us a good illustration of this a moment ago, brought me to tears. West Star scholar John Dominic Crossan addresses this with the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis 4. This is a mythic story. That is, it's made up. It's made up. But it's powerful. It's powerful. So he addresses escalatory violence in the Cain and Abel story. And you know the story. And instead of being punished by being put to death, God puts a mark on Cain's forehead so that it should be clear to anyone who sees Cain that they should not kill him. If anyone kills him, says the myth, Cain will be avenged sevenfold. This is essentially a story to prevent violence from escalating. Do not forget that Cain is held accountable for what he did. For his efforts to till the land will be difficult, and he will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth forever. So accountability is built into the story, but at the same time, it is an attempt to prevent a crime from spiraling out of control. Well, as future stories in Jewish history indicate over and over again, this doesn't exactly prevent escalatory violence. It really didn't work. Indeed, God, in the various myths, engages in some escalatory violence himself. God is always a him, a he. You know about Noah's flood. What is perhaps more helpful is looking at escalatory violence within the context of what Crossan calls the normalcy of civilization. It's a good concept to get your head around. It's the place where we all live. To use mythic language again, it is the land of Nod. It's outside of the Garden of Eden, where we all dwell as a result of eating that mythic tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The point of the story, of course, is that life consists of choices. And our actions have consequences, for good or for ill. And Crossan emphasizes the important point that escalatory violence, the normalcy of civilization, is not human nature. We are not burdened down by sin and creatures of sin, as Augustine suggested. We are not inherently evil. My mentee, Dacia Hensley, in the Coming of Age program, as she spoke last week here from this pulpit, also pointed out that the whole business of being rewarded in heaven for doing good is absurd. If that's the only reason we do good, then forget it. I repeat, life consists of choices. And we develop rules and models that we think will bring the results that we wish to achieve. And within the normalcy of civilization, we create fears and insecurities that play a major role. And we end up doing all of those things that we can list categorically, from simple prejudice to racism to misogyny to homophobia to war. We make the choices. And Crossan's thesis, which I endorse, is that we usually employ some kind of violence so that the prevailing models which govern our lives start with the use of some kind of violent force. I want now to shift gears dramatically and be so bold as to suggest that for the most part, civilizations have not been very good at coping with, let alone preventing, escalatory violence. And now humanity stands on the brink of its own annihilation. Hard violence, that is, the ability to kill people outright, is now at the breaking point. There are 9 nations that have nuclear warheads, each capable of destroying humanity entirely. There are 12,000 of those warheads. It is utter insanity. And the US and Russia have 90% of them. Trump and Putin hold the fate of all of humanity in their hands. Not a pleasant thought. But other forms of violence can destroy everyone. As my friend and scholar John Dominic Crossan says, we can destroy humanity atomically, biologically, ecologically, demographically, ecologically, and we're only up to E. We haven't gotten to Bobby Kennedy Jr. in our healthcare system. The world's great religions all take a stab at dealing with violence, but the history of each is riddled with wholesale failure. Every religion. And perhaps the best analysis of this religious phenomenon is written by Yuval Noah Harari in his book, Nexus. And I wish that I could do a whole section in this sermon on the religious establishment. Harari does a brilliant job, and I recommend his book to you highly, and you can read all about it. But I can't do it today. Time doesn't permit. But Crossan's emphasis on what he calls the normalcy of civilization is that we have a plethora of models for dealing with conflict that employ the use of violence. Humanity is expert at finding ways to punish, avenge, and decimate people. And the hard reality is that the paradigms for justice and peace that incorporate empathy are extremely, extremely difficult to come by. They are there, but they're difficult to come by. Nevertheless, it is our task to be continually developing them. And I am heartened, and I look out here at Bob Cornett, I am heartened that UUCF now has a democracy action team that is addressing very specific issues of injustice and violence. And two of those issues, particularly immigration and education, are important to some of us, maybe to all of us. C. Raven and I are involved with both of these issues at the local level, as are many of you. And I want to address education here specifically as an example of one small way that a local community can make a difference. I have spoken in other settings before regarding my support for the LGBTQ+ community and the school system's policy of 444 for trans, bisexual, and generally the LGBT community. I am now almost 88 years old, and I have been dealing with this issue for over 60 years of my life. And I am tired. LGBTQ persons are part of my family, and so in a very existential sense, I embrace their struggle. And I mention my age not because I am just old, but because this is 2025. Scientific knowledge of our human sexuality has exploded during the decades of my life, displacing once and for all gross ignorance. Simultaneously, cultural attitudes have passed the proverbial tipping point of acceptance of the LGBTQ community. And although there is always more to learn and understand, the scientific data is extremely clear. It is unequivocal. And policies 443 and 444 are consonant with that knowledge that we presently have. And for anyone in the official capacity of the educational establishment, board members, teachers, administrators, to claim otherwise is unconscionable. It is an utter embarrassment that some present members of the Board of Education promote ignorance, which in turn we know, and Rob illustrated this, lead to bigotry and hatred and violence. We know that. And educators need to enter the vast and exciting classroom of science and cultural change and do their homework. It is one thing for the general public or for political demagogues in the White House or the Defense Department to be ignorant, but it is quite another for those in the educational establishment who are trying to teach generations to come to be deliberately promoting ideas that have been proven false and dangerous. And most egregious of all is the pernicious effort to deny the inherent worth and dignity of persons regardless of their sexual identity. Are we not beyond efforts to deny the humanity of others? Will we allow policy to purposely denigrate certain individuals to the point of hating them? Can policy reach the point where it is totally devoid of empathy? Do not all students have the right to not only feel welcome, but also respected as they are? Should not our school system be a place where all students learn and thrive? I end this sermon full circle from the beginning, paying tribute to my great-grandson, Jackson, for inspiring me to struggle with the great issues of empathy and escalatory violence. And I hope one day he will be on a local school board and teach them a thing or two. Jackson's empathy illustrates true strength and compassion, not retaliation. Jackson's friend, who stepped away from his game, suggests that real courage means turning from violence to care. Jackson's actions are proof that every act of empathy interrupts the spiral of violence. Our own work as individuals and as a congregation on immigration, on war in Gaza, on education, provide us with opportunities between two paths that Jackson has laid out for us: fear and retaliation on the one hand, or empathy and humanity on the other hand. So may it be.